I'm sorry, this lounge is reserved for another VIP. Then scan my access. So why was I stopped?
Wait, let her through. She's our executive partner.
Too late. I want every name.
I'm going to need you to wait outside until we sort this out. The Meridian Air Lounge agent kept one hand over the scanner as Simone Carter held out her boarding pass and invitation card. At 43, Simone was a black woman with warm brown skin, cropped natural curls silvering at the temples, and square tortoise-shell glasses. Her pass showed business class, Meridian Summit membership, and access to the harbor room at Gate C-18. The agent had scanned none of it. Behind Simone, a white man in a navy travel blazer checked his watch. "Mr. Vale's party is arriving," the agent added. "We need to keep the room available for VIP guests." Simone looked through the frosted glass doors. The harbor room was barely half full. A coffee grinder pulsed near the buffet, and green gate numbers reflected across the stone floor. She had 40 minutes before boarding, and a video call she had already moved twice. "My reservation is for this lounge," she said. "And that room is included." The agent, Kendra Mills, gave the invitation card a glance without taking it. "Those cards can come through partner programs. We've had confusion before." A white woman behind Simone lifted an identical card from her phone wallet. Kendra scanned it immediately and waved her through. Simone felt the familiar pressure behind her ribs, the one that arrived when a simple request became a test of how much patience she could perform. "Then please scan mine." Kendra finally passed the boarding pass over the reader. The screen flashed green. Instead of opening the door, she tapped another menu. "Your membership is valid, but harbor room access is discretionary when we're accommodating priority guests." Simone pushed her glasses up. "Show me the policy that says a confirmed reservation can be displaced for one." At the nearby host stand, catering supervisor Luis Ortega, 29, stopped stacking napkins and looked over. Kendra turned the monitor slightly away. "It isn't about displacing anyone. We're managing capacity." Simone glanced at the occupancy counter beneath the fire panel, 26 of 48 seats in use. "Then capacity doesn't seem to be the issue." Kendra's mouth tightened. "Carter, I'm trying to prevent an awkward situation. Mr. Vale is one of our most important customers, and his group was promised privacy." It was at least a reason, Simone thought, but not one that explained why her confirmed access had become negotiable. She took a black fountain pen from her tote and wrote the time, gate, and Kendra's name on her itinerary. Luis stepped closer. "Kendra, harbor room reservations aren't supposed to be overridden unless guest services closes the room." Kendra looked at him sharply. "I have instructions from lounge management." "From who?" Simone asked. Kendra picked up the desk phone instead and called her supervisor, describing Simone as a guest disputing VIP accommodation who was refusing an alternate seating option. Simone heard the framing harden before anyone with authority had reviewed her pass. She slid the itinerary toward Luis. "Would you note that the scanner accepted my access before this call?" He paused, then wrote his initials beside the time. Kendra saw him do it. Less than 2 minutes later, lounge supervisor Daniel Price came through the staff door. He listened to Kendra before looking at Simone. "We can seat you in the main lounge and provide a meal voucher," he said, reaching for a paper envelope. Simone kept her hands at her sides. "I don't want compensation for a benefit I haven't agreed to surrender. I want the reservation honored, or the policy authorizing you to cancel it." Daniel glanced at the screen but never checked her invitation card. "For tonight, the harbor room is being held for Mr. Vale's party. That decision stands." He keyed something into the terminal. Simone watched her reservation change from confirmed to reassign. The wrong decision was no longer just spoken. It was in the system. Daniel's fingers were on the keyboard when Simone said, "Please leave that entry as you made it." He looked up. "Excuse me?" She tapped the time on her itinerary. "You changed a confirmed reservation after the scanner accepted my access. I'm asking you not to edit the note again while we're standing here." Kendra folded her arms. "No one is editing anything." Luis looked toward the terminal, then at Simone. Daniel exhaled through his nose. "This is an operational decision, not a denial of access. You're welcome to use the main lounge." Simone heard the shift, not whether she had been moved, but whether she would accept the new label for it. "Then let's be precise," Simone said. "Was Mr. Vale's reservation made before mine? And does his booking authorize exclusive use of the harbor room?" Daniel's expression changed. "Tell her he did not know." Kendra answered first. "He travels with us often." "That wasn't my question." Daniel glanced at the occupancy display and lowered his voice. "We have flexibility with high-value customers." Simone nodded once. "Flexibility over unsold space, maybe. But if you're taking a confirmed benefit from one traveler to improve another traveler's experience, there should be a rule or an authorization trail." Luis shifted his weight. He had stopped pretending to work. Daniel turned the monitor farther away and clicked through 2 screens. "The system allows reassignment. A system's allowing an action doesn't make the action authorized," Simone said. It was the kind of distinction she made at Ardent Grid, the energy software company she ran, in rooms where people had learned not to confuse access with permission. She did not mention the company. Her title would not make the boarding pass greener than it was. Instead, she asked, "Who approved the override?" Daniel hesitated. "Lounge management." "Name?" Another pause. "Regional guest services." Luis looked down at the initials he had written, and Simone realized Daniel was repeating a chain he had not verified. Kendra stepped closer to the terminal. "This is getting excessive. We offered you seating, food, everything the lounge provides." Simone felt irritation rise, sharper now because of the effort required to keep translating and point into smaller words. "You offered me something different after admitting the room was being held for another customer. I'm asking you to preserve the reason you entered for that change." A traveler at the host stand, an older black man in a gray quarter zip, looked over but said nothing. Daniel rubbed his forehead. "There is no formal complaint here unless you want to make one." "I do." The answer came faster than Simone expected, and with it the knowledge that her call would be missed. Luis reached beneath the host stand and pulled out the paper incident log used when the lounge software went down. "We can record the time independently," he said. Kendra stared at him. "That's for service interruptions." "It's also the only thing here with sequential pages," Luis replied. His voice was unsteady, but he opened to the next numbered sheet. Simone gave him the facts. "Scanner accepted, reservation confirmed, reassignment entered 6:42 p.m. Reason stated as VIP accommodation." Daniel objected to the wording. Luis drew a line through his first phrase instead of erasing it, initialed the correction, and left both versions visible. Daniel's face hardened. "Fine. I'll notify airport guest services that you're contesting the reassignment." He printed a receipt-size slip and handed it to Simone. The text read, "Voluntary alternate seating sipped." She stared at it, then at him. "I did not accept anything." Kendra said, "It's just the code we use." Simone placed the slip beside Luis's log and took out her pen again. "Then your code is now part of the complaint." Daniel reached for the paper, stopped, and looked toward the corridor as a Meridian guest services manager approached. For the first time, the issue was no longer who got the private room. It was whose version of the decision would become the official one. The guest services manager introduced herself as Renee Foster and asked Daniel to step back from the terminal. She asked, "What exactly changed in the reservation record?" Daniel started with the phrase VIP accommodation, but Renee stopped him. "I'm asking about the transaction." Luis slid the numbered incident sheet across the host stand. Renee read the timestamps, then compared them with the terminal. "Was Miss Carter's access green before the reassignment?" she asked. Kendra answered that the harbor room was discretionary. Renee looked at her. That wasn't the question. Daniel pulled up the reservation history. The screen showed Simone's booking created 3 days earlier, confirmed at 9:14 a.m. and altered at 6:42 p.m. The override field carried Daniel's employee number. Renee scrolled lower. "Where is the regional authorization?" Daniel pointed to a blank note field. "I was told we needed the room." "By whom?" He looked toward Kendra. She said the instruction had come through the lounge group chat from a shift lead who was already off duty. Renee's expression tightened. "So no regional guest services approval." Daniel said, "Not directly." Simone wrote one word beside the time on her itinerary: chain. Renee asked Kendra to show the message without forwarding or deleting anything. Kendra unlocked her phone. It just says Mr. Vale's party should be taken care of. Renee held out her hand but did not take the device. Read the exact wording. Kendra did. The message said, Vale Group arriving around 7. Please make the harbor room smooth if space allows. No instruction to remove anyone, no exclusivity. No mention of Simone. Luis let out a breath through his nose. Daniel stared at the terminal. The older traveler in the gray quarter-zip spoke for the first time. I heard them tell her the room was full before anybody checked it. Kendra turned toward him. Sir, this doesn't involve you. Renee raised a palm. It does if he witnessed the interaction. The man introduced himself as Marcus Reed, 56, and explained that he had entered the lounge 10 minutes earlier with the same summit access. No one had questioned his reservation, but he had heard Kendra tell Simone that VIP guests needed the room. I remember it because I looked inside, Marcus said. There were empty tables. Renee took his contact information with permission and told Luis to photograph the incident log page for the lounge record while keeping the original bound in the book. No one alters that page, she said. Kendra's face lost some color. Simone's phone buzzed with the start of her video call. She considered joining from the corridor just to prove the evening had not taken anything from her. Instead, she sent her chief operating officer a message, "Start without me. I'll join if I can." It irritated her more than she wanted to admit. That call concerned a promotion she had promised to discuss personally with an engineer who had spent months fixing a failed rollout. Simone had built a company partly around the belief that people should not have to decode whether they belonged in the room. Missing the conversation because she was defending her own place in one felt almost absurd. Renee printed the transaction history and placed it beside the incident log. "I'm restoring the reservation now," she said, "and I'm opening a service integrity review on the override and the coding." Daniel looked at her sharply. "Tonight? Tonight." She turned to Simone. "You should never have been marked as voluntarily reassigned. I can correct that immediately. The conduct review will take longer." Simone nodded. "Correct the record first." Renee did, then disabled override privileges for Daniel and Kendra pending review and reassigned them off the harbor room desk. Through the glass, the empty tables were still waiting. This time, when the door unlocked, Simone knew exactly which question had changed. Not whether she belonged there, but why the system had recorded that she chose not to. Simone entered the harbor room with 6 minutes left before boarding began. The space smelled faintly of citrus cleaner and burnt espresso, and the wall outlets beneath the banquette were already occupied by charging cables. She chose the smallest table, opened her laptop, and joined the video call late. Her chief operating officer, Naomi Brooks, 48, was midway through explaining the promotion package. Simone muted herself and listened instead of taking control. When the engineer they were promoting finished speaking, Simone apologized for the delay without turning the airport incident into an explanation. "You earned this conversation without competing with my evening," she said. Afterward, Naomi stayed on. "That sounded expensive," she said. Simone rubbed the edge of her fountain pen between two fingers. "It cost 40 minutes. I'm more irritated about those than the lounge." Naomi knew that tone. "You're going to work the problem until you make the airport confess something it may not even understand yet." Simone looked through the glass toward the host desk, where Renee was now reviewing the terminal with another employee. "The record said I volunteered, that matters." "It does," Naomi said. "But you also have a board presentation tomorrow morning. Don't make proving one bad decision the only thing you do tonight." Simone almost answered that bad decisions became systems when nobody followed them backward. Instead, she said, "I know. It was not agreement." Naomi heard that too. "Call me when you land, not from the plane, not from a taxi. When you land." Before Simone could pack up, Renee entered carrying a slim folder. "I found something I think you should know." She sat only after Simone nodded. The reservation software maintained a change history, but the lounge team also used a separate nightly occupancy worksheet for premium rooms. Harbor room seats were supposed to be assigned by confirmation time unless a guest purchased exclusive use in advance. Vale's party had no exclusive booking. More troubling, Renee said, Daniel had manually changed the worksheet before Simone arrived, reducing the number of available reserved seats from 22 to 8. That doesn't prove why he did it, Renee added. But it means the capacity explanation was built before your scanner ever turned green. Simone felt the temptation to connect everything immediately. She resisted it for several seconds, then failed. How many times has he done that? Renee's expression warned her. I don't know yet. You have the worksheets. Some are digital, some paper. We need to preserve them before comparing anything. Simone leaned back. She had spent years telling executives not to outrun their evidence, and here she was doing exactly that because the pattern felt familiar enough to hurt. You're right, she said. I'm making an inference, Renee nodded. A reasonable one. Still an inference. The correction irritated Simone, then steadied her. Preserve first. Interpret second. Renee wrote the phrase on the folder tab. Luis appeared at the doorway carrying the bound incident log in both hands. He had photographed the page as instructed, but Kendra had asked him afterward whether older entries could be cleaned up before management reviewed them. Luis had refused. She didn't threaten me, he said quickly. She said old notes get messy and people write things wrong. Renee asked whether anyone had touched the book. No. I brought it straight here. Simone watched him set it on the table as if it weighed more than paper should. You did the right thing, she said. Luis gave a small shrug. I did it late. Simone understood the distinction. She asked Renee to make sure his name was attached to the preservation request, not buried as an anonymous witness unless he wanted that. Luis said he wanted his name on it. A boarding announcement sounded for Simone's flight. Renee closed the folder. I've placed Daniel and Kendra off lounge-facing duty pending review, preserved tonight's reservation history, and requested the previous 30 days of occupancy worksheets. Regional compliance takes over from here. Simone slid the fountain pen back into her tote. Then I'm going to board. She stopped at the door and looked once more at the green occupancy display. 28 of 48. The room had never been the problem. Outside, Naomi's message waited on her phone, land first. Fix later. Simone smiled despite herself and obeyed. Behind her, Renee carried the incident log toward a locked office, and the complaint had become larger than a single reassigned seat without yet becoming anything they had proved. The cabin door had barely closed when Simone's phone vibrated with a message from Renee. Regional compliance has frozen edits on harbor room records for the last 30 days. Simone read it once, then put the phone face down on her tray table. She had promised Naomi she would land before working the problem again, and breaking that promise would be easy to justify. Instead, she opened the board presentation, corrected 2 numbers, and spent 20 minutes reviewing a staffing plan unrelated to Meridian. The ordinary work helped. By the time the plane leveled above the clouds, the lounge had become an unresolved problem rather than the entire shape of her evening. When Simone landed in Denver, Naomi called before she reached baggage claim. Did you wait? She asked. Mostly. Simone heard Naomi laugh. Then Renee joined by conference call with Simone's permission and explained that compliance had found 11 manual harbor room capacity reductions over 30 days, all entered by Daniel or Kendra. 7 occurred shortly before high-tier travelers arrived. That was a pattern worth examining, Renee said, but not proof of discriminatory intent. The more immediate issue was procedural. Confirmed guests had been reassigned without documented authorization, and several records used the same voluntary alternate seating code even when no acceptance note existed. Simone stopped beside a row of silver luggage carts. How many guests challenged it? Renee said only 3 formal complaints appeared in the system. That's part of the problem. If the code says voluntary, the event doesn't automatically route to complaint review. Simone closed her eyes for a second. The structure was worse than the insult because it could erase the disagreement itself. So the metric is teaching management that people agreed to something they may have contested. Renee said yes, cautiously. Compliance had ordered preservation of the worksheets, terminal histories, and staff messages, and had asked corporate audit to compare the reassignment code against guest service notes before drawing conclusions. Naomi broke in. "Simone, don't turn yourself into their investigator." The irritation in her voice was protective, not dismissive. "You have your own company to run tomorrow." Simone almost pushed back, then remembered the missed promotion call. Fair. She asked Renee what she actually needed from her. Renee requested a written account limited to what Simone saw and heard, plus the itinerary page showing Luis's initials and the printed slip. No theories. No demand for firings. Simone smiled despite the hour. "Facts I can do." She photographed the documents under the bright baggage claim lights and sent them before her suitcase appeared. At home, Simone found her neighbor and longtime friend, Celeste Morgan, 51, waiting with the spare key and a container of lentil stew she had threatened to leave in the refrigerator whether Simone wanted it or not. Simone ate at the kitchen counter while describing only the part she could not stop thinking about. The false consent code. Celeste listened, then said, "You always notice the mechanism after everyone else notices the insult." Simone looked at the fountain pen beside her bowl. "Mechanisms repeat." Celeste nodded. "So do people who forget to eat." Simone laughed, finally, and finished the stew before opening her laptop again. At 11:18 p.m., Renee sent one final update. Meridian had suspended Daniel and Kendra from lounge duties, along with the shift lead who had issued the vague veil instruction, pending a formal review. Luis remained on schedule and had been designated a protected witness under the company's internal non-retaliation policy. More significantly, regional compliance had suspended use of the voluntary reassignment code across the airport until audit could test whether it had concealed disputed removals elsewhere. Simone read the message twice, then closed the laptop instead of replying. The team's suspension was immediate. The truth would take longer. On her kitchen counter, the printed slip still said "accept," while the system that had produced it had finally been forced to stop pretending that word meant the same thing for everyone. By 8 the next morning, Simone was standing in Ardent Grid's glass-walled conference room while Naomi reviewed the board deck. Simone had slept 5 hours. When a director questioned a staffing projection, she answered too sharply, caught herself, and started again. After the meeting, Naomi closed the door. "You're doing it again." Simone removed her glasses. "Doing what?" "Treating concentration like a switch you can force." Simone looked at the city beyond the windows. "I'm fine." Naomi gave her a look. "No, you're functional." Different thing. Outside, overnight rain silvered the windows. At 9:36, Renee called with a compliance analyst named Priya Shah. Priya explained that the audit team had begun testing the disputed reassignment code against time-stamped lounge notes. Of 12 sampled cases, 5 contained language showing the guest had objected, yet the system still recorded voluntary acceptance. Were those 5 all black travelers? Priya answered carefully. "We have not completed demographic review, and I don't want to overstate what we know." Simone appreciated the restraint. Priya continued. "What we can say now is that the code was used in ways the policy did not permit. We're separating process failure from motive before we draw conclusions." Priya asked Simone to repeat only the phrases she remembered exactly. Naomi stayed in the room for the call. "What happens to the people who were coded incorrectly?" Priya said Meridian could identify affected reservations, restore complaint eligibility, and contact guests for review. That answer shifted Simone's attention. The quieter consequence was travelers who might have left believing there was nothing to challenge because the system had already recorded their consent. "Then don't start with punishment," Simone said. "Start by reopening the doors that code closed." Priya was silent for a moment, then said, "That's already being drafted." Naomi wrote down the remedy, not the employees' names. Later that morning, Simone joined the promoted engineer, Devon Pike, 32, for coffee. She expected awkwardness. Instead, Devon handed her a marked-up rollout diagram. "I figured you'd want the part that still breaks." Simone laughed. "This is why we promoted you." They spent 20 minutes tracing a failure path through a battery dispatch model until Devon found the source in an old exception rule. The work demanded her full attention. Before they left, she told him, "Document the exception, then delete it if it no longer serves a real case." The sentence sounded familiar the moment she said it. Devon circled the faulty branch in red. That afternoon, Priya sent a preliminary finding. Daniel had not invented the reassignment practice alone. 6 months earlier, lounge leadership had informally encouraged staff to protect premium experiences during visits by celebrities, investors, and top-tier business travelers without defining whose confirmed access could be displaced. Priya also found that Kendra had used the disputed code more often than other agents, but the sample was still too small to establish a racial pattern. Simone read the summary twice. The uncomfortable truth was less theatrical than a conspiracy and more useful. A loose directive, performance pressure, and a coding shortcut had combined into a system that made unequal treatment easier to hide. Several supervisors, Priya noted, had treated the vague instruction as permission. At 4:10 p.m., Meridian's Regional Operations Office issued a temporary rule. No confirmed harbor room reservation could be reassigned without written guest consent or a documented safety or capacity. Reason, and every disputed change would automatically generate review. The suspended employees remained off-duty while interviews continued. Luis received written confirmation that his schedule and promotion eligibility were protected during the investigation. Simone forwarded that paragraph to Naomi. Naomi replied with a single line, "Better mechanism." Simone set the phone down beside her fountain pen. For the first time since the airport, the story had moved beyond whether she should have been admitted. The harder question now was who had taught the system to mistake convenience for consent. The record, Simone realized, had been built to close the door afterward. The next afternoon, Simone joined Meridian's formal review by video while Priya sat in a conference room at the airport with Renee, Daniel, Kendra, and the regional lounge director Thomas Bell. Priya opened with the transaction history, not accusations. She projected Simone's reservation, the 6:42 p.m. override, and the voluntary reassignment code. "This record says the guest accepted alternate seating," she said. "The incident log says she objected before and after the code was entered." Daniel leaned forward. "That code was the closest available option." Priya nodded. "Then we need to determine whether the code reflects the guest's decision or staff convenience." She moved to the occupancy worksheet. The harbor room had 22 open seats when Daniel reduced the available count to 8. Thomas said staff were often asked to prepare for VIP arrivals. "Preparing is not the issue," Priya said. "The question is whether that instruction authorized removal of confirmed guests." She displayed the shift lead message. "Please make the harbor room smooth if space allows." Daniel admitted he had treated it as permission to protect the room. Kendra added that senior travelers complained when premium spaces felt crowded. Simone listened without interrupting. The explanation was believable enough to matter. It still did not authorize what they had done. Priya then set the practice against Meridian's written policy. Confirmed harbor room reservations could be reassigned for closure, safety, verified capacity, or with guest consent. None applied to Simone. Thomas rubbed his chin. "We had an informal expectation around high-value accounts." Renee asked, "Who approved that expectation?" Thomas hesitated. "It developed operationally." That answer changed the room. Simone finally spoke. "Then staff were being measured against something nobody was willing to put into policy." Thomas looked uncomfortable. "That doesn't excuse inaccurate coding." "No," Simone said, "but if you want this fixed, you have to separate the people who made choices from the pressure that made those choices easy to rationalize." Luis had provided a written statement instead of attending, and Priya read only the relevant lines. He confirmed the scanner had shown green, the room was below capacity, and Simone had never agreed to alternate seating. He also described Kendra's request to clean up old notes. Kendra's voice tightened. "I meant remove confusing wording, not falsify anything." Priya did not challenge the intention. She asked whether Kendra understood that changing a contemporaneous note after a complaint could alter the record. Kendra was quiet for several seconds. "Yes." It was the first answer she gave without qualification. Priya marked it down and moved on. The final layer was the audit sample. 5 disputed reassignment had been coded voluntary, but the demographic review was incomplete. 2 involved black travelers, 1 Latino traveler, and 2 white travelers. Priya was explicit. There was not yet evidence supporting a broad racial conclusion from that sample alone. What was established was selective discretion, inaccurate consent coding, and a VIP practice with no written boundary. Simone felt the disappointment of uncertainty and, oddly, relief. The review had not manufactured a cleaner villain than the facts allowed. Priya recommended restoring complaint rights to affected guests, suspending the code until redesign, and examining whether certain groups had faced the practice more often over a larger period. Thomas asked Simone what outcome she wanted. She thought of the first night, when a green scanner had still failed to open the door. "I want the original record corrected, every affected guest given a real appeal path, and no employee disciplined for following an unwritten expectation unless you also examine who created it." Daniel looked at her then, surprised. Priya closed the file. Meridian would continue Daniel and Kendra's suspension pending individual findings. But Thomas's leadership review would begin immediately, and the VIP accommodation practice was formally halted across the region. Simone ended the call without feeling victorious. The system had finally been forced to choose between protecting a habit and naming it. 2 days later, Meridian asked Simone to return to the airport for a live test of the revised harbor room process. Priya met her outside gate C-18 with Renee and a compliance technician carrying a tablet. Daniel and Kendra were still suspended from lounge duties, and Thomas Bell had been removed from scheduling decisions while his leadership review continued. "We rebuilt the consent step," Priya said. "Now we need someone who knows where the old process failed." Simone almost declined. Her board had a product review that afternoon. Then she remembered the printed slip that had turned refusal into agreement. "1 hour," she said. "I'm leaving at noon." Inside the lounge, the coffee grinder started and stopped with the same uneven pulse Simone remembered. The test used a dummy reservation under her name. Renee scanned it green, then selected Re-ass again. The new screen would not advance until a policy-approved reason was chosen. VIP accommodation was gone. If consent was selected, a second screen required the traveler to confirm personally on the tablet or decline. Priya handed it to Simone. She tapped it Airline. The system created a dispute flag and locked the original reservation. "That would have stopped Daniel from coding you as voluntary," Priya said. Simone nodded. "It also makes disagreement visible before someone has to know how to complain." The harder test came next. Priya opened anonymized records from the past 6 months. Compliance had expanded the sample to 84 harbor room, reassigned across 3 airports. The data did not show one clean racial pattern, but it did show something narrower. Travelers with no corporate travel manager, elite concierge contact, or prior complaint history were more likely to be coded as accepting alternate seating. Black travelers appeared more often in that group at C-18 than their share of confirmed bookings, but Priya cautioned that the review still needed independent statistical validation. Simone appreciated the restraint. Correlation, however troubling, was not yet conclusion. Renee pulled up 5 records where original notes had survived. In 3, staff had written phrases such as "guest unhappy but moved," while the transaction code said voluntary. In 1, a white traveler had objected, and later received a correction after his company's travel office intervened. In another, a black traveler had never been contacted after contesting the move at the desk. "That difference matters," Simone said, "not because one person complained louder, but because one person had a second channel into the system." Priya agreed. The audit recommendation expanded again. Disputed reassignment would no longer depend on outside advocacy to trigger review. At 11:37, Luis arrived for his shift wearing the same gray Meridian vest Simone remembered. He stopped when he saw her, unsure whether to approach. Simone waved him over. "You kept the log intact, that mattered." Luis glanced toward Renee. "I almost stayed out of it. Most people almost do." Renee told him compliance had approved a preservation protocol for paper logs and that his promotion review would proceed on schedule. Luis admitted he had worried speaking up would mark him as difficult. Simone said, "Systems teach people what silence costs and what truth costs. Make sure they stop pricing those differently." At noon, Priya closed the live test and issued the first confirmed findings. Meridian would restore complaint rights to every disputed reassignment in the audit period, contact affected travelers, require explicit consent for premium room changes, and remove VIP preference from local override authority. Thomas would face a separate leadership determination after interviews concluded. Daniel and Kendra's individual findings were still pending, but their suspensions remained. Simone checked the time and shut her laptop before Priya could ask another question. She had promised 1 hour, and this time she kept the boundary. As she walked past the harbor room, the scanner turned green for another traveler, and the door opened without negotiation. The mechanism had changed. Now Meridian had to decide what accountability looked like for the people who had relied on the old one. Meridian's final personnel findings arrived the following Monday, but Simone did not open the message until after lunch. She had spent the morning in Ardent Grid's test lab with Devon, where a sensor kept rejecting valid battery data. He wanted to patch around it. Simone made him trace the source instead. "If the system says no for the wrong reason, you don't teach people to work around it," she said. Devon looked at her, then at the sensor rack. "You know that sounded less like engineering than usual." Simone smiled despite herself. "Fix the rule anyway." After the test passed, she returned to her office and opened Priya's report. Daniel's suspension would end with a formal written warning, retraining, and removal of local override authority for 6 months. The review found that he had made an unauthorized reassignment and used an inaccurate consent code, but it also found he had acted within an informal VIP culture encouraged by leadership rather than inventing the practice himself. Kendra received a longer suspension and a final warning because she had repeatedly used the code after guests objected and had later suggested revising older notes. Thomas Bell lost his regional lounge management role for creating and tolerating the unwritten practice without safeguards. He would remain with Meridian in a non-supervisory operations position pending further review. Simone read that section twice. No one had been dramatically marched out of an airport. The consequences were narrower, slower, and more credible than the anger she had felt at C-18. Priya's note explained that disciplinary decisions were based on verified conduct, prior history, and authority level. The company had completed an external statistical review of the 6-month sample. It found a significant disparity at the C-18 lounge. Black travelers with confirmed reservations were reassigned at a higher rate than similarly situated white travelers, even after accounting for membership tier and party size. The report did not claim to prove individual intent in every case. It did conclude that discretionary VIP handling had produced unequal outcomes. The remedies mattered more to Simone than the wording. Meridian had contacted every traveler whose reassignment record conflicted with contemporaneous notes, reopened their complaint windows, restored affected lounge credits, and offered reimbursement where documented benefits had been lost. The voluntary reassignment code had been retired nationwide. A traveler now had to confirm consent directly, and disputed changes generated automatic review. Luis's promotion review had gone forward, and he had been selected for a lead catering role. Renee had been asked to help train other stations on record preservation and guest consent procedures. The system had not become fair because one person complained. It had become harder to hide unfairness when someone did. That evening, Simone stopped at a neighborhood hardware store on the way home to replace a stripped cabinet hinge. Celeste met her there and watched Simone compare 3 nearly identical screws for too long. "You ran a company all day, but this is what breaks you." Simone held up the tiny brass hinge. "This has clearer governance." Celeste laughed so loudly that a clerk looked over. In the parking lot, Simone finally told her the findings. Celeste asked whether she felt satisfied. Simone considered it. "I feel like the door works better now." That wasn't the question. Simone slid the hinge into her coat pocket. "It's the answer I have." Before bed, Simone received one last message from Renee. The harbor room's first monthly audit showed 0 disputed reassigned coded as voluntary and 3 guest refusals preserved correctly. Attached was a photograph Luis had taken with management's permission. The old bound incident log sealed in an archive sleeve, his initials still visible beside Simone's 642 entry. She saved the image, then deleted the original printed slip from the folder on her desk after scanning it into her records. The word "SIP" no longer carried authority it had never earned. Tomorrow, Priya would send the final closure letter. Tonight, Simone had something rarer than vindication, proof that the correction had survived after everyone went home. Priya's closure letter arrived the next afternoon, concise enough that Simone read it standing beside the test lab instead of saving it for later. Meridian confirmed the C-18 findings, the personnel actions, the restored complaint rights, and the nationwide retirement of the voluntary reassignment code. It also committed to quarterly audits of premium space overrides for 1 year, with results reviewed outside lounge operations. Simone noticed what was missing. No grand declaration, no claim that one training session had solved bias, no suggestion that the airport could certify itself fair forever. The letter named the conduct, the remedy, and the mechanism that would be measured after attention moved elsewhere. At gate C-18 2 weeks later, Simone returned for a morning flight. She carried the same black tote and fountain pen, though the itinerary tucked inside was new. Renee was working the entry desk, beside a recently promoted Luis, whose lead badge sat slightly crooked on his vest. Neither made a ceremony of seeing her. Luis scanned her pass. The reader flashed green, and the harbor room door unlocked. "You're good," he said, then added, "and before you ask, the override report ran clean again this week." Simone laughed. "I wasn't going to ask." Renee raised an eyebrow. Simone surrendered. "I was thinking about asking." Inside, she chose a table near the window and joined Devon for a short project check-in. He had fixed the battery exception without building another workaround, and the new rule had survived 3 test cycles. Simone listened while he explained what still worried him, then told him to own the next review without waiting for her approval on every detail. When the call ended, she closed the laptop instead of reopening the Meridian file. Around her, travelers ate breakfast, charged phones, argued softly about connections, and left half-finished coffee cooling beside their bags. The room had become ordinary again, which felt more satisfying than having it remember her. Before boarding, Renee brought over a single-page summary from the first quarterly review. Disputed reassignment rates had fallen sharply across the region, and no station had used informal VIP preference to remove a confirmed guest. 3 employees had challenged override requests from supervisors and documented the refusals correctly. "That part matters," Renee said. "People are using the rule even when it's inconvenient." Simone folded the page once. "Then the rule is starting to belong to them." Renee hesitated before adding that Thomas had completed retraining and requested assignment to a station operations team with no guest priority authority. Daniel had returned to work under review. Kendra had chosen to resign rather than continue under a final warning. None of it was neat, but none of it was hidden. Simone boarded on time and found Naomi already seated across the aisle, traveling with her to a supplier meeting in Phoenix. Naomi looked at the folded Meridian summary in Simone's hand. "Please tell me you're not bringing airport governance into procurement." Simone slid the paper into her tote. "I'm bringing a pen," Naomi groaned. As the aircraft pushed back, Simone watched Gate C-18 pass beyond the window, the harbor room glass catching morning light without looking important. She thought about the first night, when a system had translated refusal into consent because convenience needed a cleaner story. Now disagreement created a record instead of disappearing inside one. Her phone buzzed once before airplane mode. The message was from Priya. Another Meridian airport had requested the C-18 review materials after discovering a different problem, not lounge access, but automated wheelchair service cancellations marked as passenger requested. Priya wrote that the new case was being handled separately and asked whether Simone would be willing. later to speak the accessibility review team about consent design rather than investigate the case itself. Simone read the message, then locked her screen. "Work?" Naomi asked. Simone looked out as the plane turned toward the runway. "Maybe. Different door." She put the phone away, opened her notebook to the supplier agenda, and left Priya's message unanswered for the moment.